Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending. I hope you had a nice lunch break, or good morning if you've just dialed in from the States, and I hope you had a nice breakfast. Today we're going to be following on from a series of webinars I've been running around some of our solutions and applications, and just trying to kind of expose a bit about what we can do with them and how they work, and how they make life a little bit easier in your own environments. And so we're going to be concentrating on these sort of importing and exporting processes and go through what we have on offer here at DocAuto. So a little bit of background. DocAuto, founded in 1997. Most of you who are attending today are already well aware of us and what we can deliver. We have a UK and US presence, Atlanta and London. We have a partner network globally, but also a direct service and offering as well. The key thing really to take from this is that everything we do is all driven through the three-tier architecture of Worksite, and certainly when we're importing and exporting in today's session, that's pretty important that we maintain that rigid mantra in our software development. So we founded 97, and then since then we've grown quite nicely with a section of solid applications that are used globally. One of our flagstone solutions is our Workspace Manager tool, which we won't be discussing today. But really what this timeline depicts is how we've developed our applications, we've bedded them in, and then we've moved on to the next application. And that's become a really successful business model for us. And it's moving really nicely into today and the future in terms of where we're taking our technology. So we have clients all over the world, and if you're lucky enough, your picture of your firms is on this screen here. Everything we do, we are more than happy to provide references for and examples for from other clients as well. So the solutions that we have on offer break down into these sections, and today we're going to be concentrating on this area down here. The WebEx we did last week, we were looking around the monitoring and the alerting of our document management system through our Watchdog solution. But we're going to be concentrating on this area here. Other areas that we specialize in is the matter-centric management, the Workspace Manager, the Workspace Manager desktop, the product that will allow us as a user to right-click on a workspace and build structures and security on the fly into that environment without the need to get IT involved. We have a very popular email management solution now that really is a healthy competition to the communication server, but then some as well. It offers some extra functions and features that on a future WebEx I'll be showing our clients and how we can take advantage of that. But let's concentrate now on importing and exporting. We run professional services, and all the engineers at DocAuto are all certified through the HP iManage program. We do everything from standard product knowledge integration from our solutions all the way through to complete worksite integration, health checks, upgrades, installations, and so forth. So the solutions that we have at DocAuto for importing and exporting, we basically have three areas that we specialize and concentrate on. We have our import desktop solution, we have our import server solution, and we have an export solution. So the import desktop piece, key sort of areas, if you like, about the advantages of it before we start to see it. It's a client install. Now, every IT department, from my experience, should have a set of import tools, at least the IT department. And the reason why is because actually to import stuff using the standard Worksite solution is pretty cumbersome. You're limited to how much you can import in one go. It's not very dynamic, and it's very, very slow. So our import desktop tool will basically overtake that challenge quite quickly. It's a very quick install to do. It's a client install on either file site or desk site. We don't care what version you're using because we use the API correctly, which is great. With the import tool, we have the ability to preserve structures of file stores that we're bringing in, and we can import multiple documents in any one time within those structures as well. What's also quite nice is we can also filter what we want to bring into the system, and that's quite important if you get a new joiner, for example, who turns up with a disk full of data, and actually most of it's just stuff that you don't really see as suitable for your own organization. So we can filter that stuff out before it even gets into your system takes up a document number, is indexed, and all those other parts of the mechanical process. And then within there as well, with our import desktop tool, as you'll see shortly, we also have administration options to allow you to control what can be done should you push the product out to maybe the whole firm or a whole group of users, that you don't actually want to give everybody the facility to have admin rights over that product. So we also have our import server tool. Now this is a very, very powerful piece of kit. I've done some big projects with this tool over the years, and I'll share with you how this all works as we go through. So the import server tool was originally designed to go one step further from the desktop tool. The desktop tool is about sort of the point and shoot process of finding the data and pointing to a workspace and importing it and getting on with your day. The import server tool is designed to target multiple file locations in one go, and to scan that file location and identify what should go in other or multiple workspaces in your environment, or folders potentially. We run it on a schedule on a demand, whereas the desktop tool is really run by a right-click function, like an iCommand right-click function, whereas this can be run on a schedule to do multiple jobs in one session. We can create new workspaces as we import data, or we can match on workspaces already existing in your organization. And I'll speak about some examples about how this has worked in the past for me personally shortly. And we can also create within the product a quite nice workflow process that allows us to take each document at a time and identify the criteria that it's going to abide by before it enters the worksite world. And that is things like identifying the types of documents you're going to import, associating the right metadata, the security model, and so forth within the product, so that when it hits worksite, everything is queued up exactly as you've designed your jobs to be. There are also some post-processing options built into the product as well, which includes document deletion. And what we mean by this is that if you have to import say 10,000 documents from a file store, a great way to identify, for example, that those documents have correctly imported is to actually potentially delete them, or copies of them, from the original location, so that you then only have one copy of that document in any location. You don't then have the challenge of multiple copies of a document in worksite or outside of worksite and so forth. So some pretty clever things we can do with post-processing, which is quite nice. And those are just some of the features, and hopefully when we see the product shortly, you'll start to see those features as well. And a typical example of the worksite sort of challenge, if you like, that I've seen with the server tool is something along these lines. So here we have a law firm, London Law Associates, and they're doing pretty well. They're a typical law firm. They've got a structured, matter-centric environment. Users that are working on their day-to-day stuff, no problem. A really good security model in place. Everything is managed correctly through all the processes that have been embedded in over time. And they may have, say, 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 million documents all running pretty well. And then what happens is the partners send an email out to you guys and say, hey, we're just merging with another firm called Partners & Sons. And that sounds great from a business point of view, but from a technical standpoint, that becomes a challenge, because you don't necessarily know what you're dealing with. You could be dealing with no DMS at all. Crazy as it sounds, but there are still some firms out there who don't work with a document management system. And so the challenge for you will be to bring them into your own worksite world, if you like. They may have unmanaged Windows file shares. And that is a real headache for people, to identify documents that should be in a structured environment, say within a workspace or a folder. No metadata, no security. So how are we going to deal with those challenges? And the aim from the partnership is really to create that big company with a larger active and a larger archive database with both the old and the new data in there. So I'm going to show you shortly how I've approached that in the past, with some real nice sort of examples along the way. And finally, before we look at the demo, the exporter tool. It's all very well getting stuff into the system, but occasionally people want stuff out of the system. And again, if you use the native worksite process, it's quite cumbersome in how it actually works, and it's limited to how much you can actually do. So our export tool allows us to do things like this, to allow you for differential exports. So you may target an individual workspace that you're going to run an export against every week, moving new stuff out or copies of the new stuff out of your environment to a USB stick to give to a client maybe. And so we can do what we call differential exports. We can schedule and automate stuff through our server platform, and that also allows you to have email notifications. So you can be notified if stuff's completed. Again, from an IT perspective, if you are the person in charge of exporting some data, you don't know how long things are going to take to export, and the last thing you want to do is just watch a log file stream on your window. We can actually set this up to have an email to send out to you once the the notification is completed and the export's done. When we export stuff, we can capture all the security, the metadata, and the history of those documents. And that's pretty important when we're exporting stuff maybe to give to a client. They want to know the background of those documents themselves. And we can also identify the other versions of documents and also related documents. We do see this a lot where users will relate documents together within the system, albeit maybe in completely different workspace structures. And actually, if we're doing an export, we can identify if we want to bring those related documents out with us with that export. Again, this is a client install, so it's very quick to install and quite intuitive how it works. And like with the import, we can filter out what you want to export. And that could be, for example, when somebody is leaving the firm and they're taking their data with them. The business can say, yes, we'll export your data from the system, but what that means is that they're only going to be exporting stuff that user has authored, not necessarily the whole contents of a workspace or client file. And then finally, with the export tool, we have two parts to it, which is quite nice. We have a client install that sits within Outlook with our file site and desk site parts, but we also have a standalone export tool, and that allows you to run outside of those applications that will allow you to export multiple workspaces in one session. But one thing we've found using some of the integration pieces of the file site desk site is that if a workspace has more than 9,999 documents, it will not necessarily export correctly. We can bypass that using our standalone tool, which is pretty handy. So some typical day-to-day challenges, and I'm going to try and go through some of these in my sort of brief demo that's sort of coming up shortly. So the import desktop tool, import server, and worksite exporter tool. So the import tool, you have a new joiner that's joined your firm and they need data placed in their personal workspace and maybe some key workspaces to get them up and running. And they've joined your firm, they've given you a CD or a USB stick with that data. Import server, as I said before, the classic situation is a firm has merged and a large-scale data import with complex structures needs to be imported. And the import server itself really is a way of maybe taking away the need for having a developer or a specialist consultant spend a long time doing complex imports when this product can actually do it for you. And I'll give you an example of that. I've worked with a client here in London before where we had to merge data from an office into their head office in London. And there's about 1 million documents in tow. And the complete service engagement from start to finish took me about 5 days all in, using the solution, including all the prerequisites, the testing, and the go-live. To do that with a standalone consultant, I believe they were quoted around 20 days. So in terms of your own budgets and costs, the investment you make in the server tool far outweighs having to use one-off people as and when required. And then finally, the Worksite export tool. Some typical challenges or scenarios we use the Worksite export tool for. Publishing stuff to an extranet, lateral moves. People are moving around the firm, want to get that stuff out of maybe the library they're in into another one. Activity monitoring, backups. Interesting enough, actually, I have seen this where firms are essentially exporting maybe workspaces and content from their Worksite environment that are older than a certain date range, maybe older than 10 years, and they're taking that stuff out of Worksite and they're putting it onto a standalone file store out of the system that they can get back in if they're required through the import tools, but it's off their live system and they don't need to worry about it. And again, finally, those departing users that are leaving the firm and want to take their data with them. So we have now my demonstration system here. This is a version 9 of Worksite, the latest and greatest, so to speak. And if I was to go through some of those applications now. So here is my file site tree, and I've got my sort of standalone sort of work list here, and there's nothing customized about my setup here. I have a workspace here called, for example, trademark renewal. And let's say I'm a user and I needed to get some content into those folders. Maybe I've been working away from the office for a while, I need to get that stuff in. I can simply right-click on the documents and go to the document import option here, and it brings up our splash screen that allows me to straight away see my whole Windows structure, okay? And I can identify either folders or maybe individual documents that I want to bring into my workspace structure. We have a number of options that we can define, we can preset, and we can lock down if required. And just to run through these, so when we import information into our worksite environment here, when we can set the security model to inherit or any generic or specific security model. We can also delete structure empty folders from the target or from the recipient location as well, which is quite a nice way to keep other areas quite tidy, maybe another file store. We can filter out what we want to import or what we don't want to import against our file types. Quite common if you get a lawyer who joins and they also have iTunes backed up on their USB stick and you don't want to infest your DMS with iTunes and other movie files, for example. Folder metadata, when we import folder information into Worksite, what we can do is we can define what we want the values to be from the whole Worksite profile card here on the left, and to display that on the right-hand side here. And that's the same for our metadata filtering. So when we bring information into Worksite, we can predefine what we think or what we would like information to be displayed as. And you can see here we have file name displayed here under my description. If I right-click on my options here, what we can do is I've got some options that will allow the product to read the file structure from our location and apply information to it as it comes into Worksite. And this is pretty handy when we're importing folder structures and names that we need to add dynamically to our imports as they come through. We have a number of administrative options around how we want people to import data, and we can also set some logging levels about what we would like to log as well when we bring our imports in. Now, this actual box that we have here, we can actually lock that down so a user has no control in that. We can predefine those settings. So when we come to run an import, we could do an estimate that will tell me how long the system will take to do the import. Pretty handy if you're doing a large-scale import. Or I can simply click on the imports and I can identify the options around what I'm actually importing just to verify that. And you'll notice here that this option here is grayed out. What that actually means is that that option to change that value has been denied to the end user. They cannot change that value now, which is quite handy. So we're going to import the data, and that's done that pretty quickly. It just imported a couple of documents straight into my system here. And as I come now to close this down and refresh, hopefully, there we go, here's our documents. And the key thing here is that we also write to our history table. This is pretty important so we can track what's coming into the system by whoever it is that's actually doing the operation. So I hope you can see there that it's a fairly straightforward and simple mechanism to do. You simply right-click at whatever level we want to, maybe at a workspace level. We can bring a complete folder structure in, import that straight into our Worksite environment, and that will go through, look at the whole content of that folder, bring it into the workspace. And if the workspace folder does not exist, all being well, when we refresh this now, we should now see some top-level workspace in there. There we go. Okay. So, moving on to a more complex setup is how do we manage a scenario where you may have multiple structures with data within it, okay? And this is quite common if you were to, like we said, merge with another firm. You're inheriting how they've done their work from from times gone by, and you're trying to bring that data into a structured worksite environment. So what we have is we have our our import servant platform, and this is the application here. Now, essentially how we actually manage the product is that we have to take some information from somewhere. Now, generally what we do is we take our source data from the network share. And here we have, I've got it set to my C drive imports in the partner sun location here. But that could be any direct sort of network share on your domain, and that it will read directly from that source. So that's the place where the product's going to take the information from. And at this stage here, I'm actually pointing directly to the worksite library as a whole. I could actually point to an individual workspace, but for this situation, we know there's lots of potential workspaces in our system that we want to import data to, so we're just going to set that top level. And we have a number of options within the product itself. We have the ability, again, to build structures as well when we bring our data in. We can import everything, like with the desktop tool, and we can also skip certain types of documents that we want to bring in, or maybe only documents that have been recently edited from a certain time range. What we also do to make it a little bit cleaner for these imports is we also take an extract from a database. So what I've done is I've actually exported information from my file store here, and I've managed to display it into a table structure on my SQL environment here. And this will tell me from an information point of view the file store that I'm actually working on. And I've actually managed to export the client and matter columns into this table here. And this becomes quite important when we start to track and trace what we're actually importing into our system. You'll notice on the right-hand side here, I've also got a number of other columns, and we use these within our product to update the table when we start to do our imports. So I know exactly what has imported and maybe what document number has been assigned to those documents once they come into our system. So this is all part of the setup that we would do to use a big import process, like I've done in previous sort of project work here in London. So once we've got that information, what we do now is we have the information we want to import. We have a reference to where the data is. We then go through a nice sort of workflow process. And what this allows us to do is to break down the information that's available to us and start to match it to the worksite possibilities in our document management system. And we can do things through a number of different steps. And I'm just going to step you through the things I've set up here. So we have options around importing data directly, checking some tables potentially. Now what I've done with my SQL there, I don't have to do every time, but I've actually done it so I've got exact references to where documents live in the system. I can then identify the documents that I want to import, and you'll notice I've started to build out a profile card. And if I start to take my variables here, what I can do is I can reference all the information from my custom profile card, and I can either use one of my values that I can display here, including we can also migrate data from Hummingbird, which is pretty handy, but also we're taking these values here. Now these values are used to define data from the source, whether it be, for example, the option here that has level. So the LEV value there actually depicts the level of the data we're looking for from within our file store. And this would be, for example, levels 1, 2, 3, 4, and that would end up being my matter code, for example. And that's how we start to take the structured information and apply it to our imports. I could also just import and identify an individual person as well onto the profile card. I can set security. I can create some specific security if I wanted to, or I can set it to public, and that's a fairly standard process. Once we've grabbed that data, we want to find the workspace. So we go off into our system, and taking the values client and matter from my SQL environment here, I can see straight away a nice way to match up my client matter information and apply it to my templates. And where it gets quite nice is, before I've completed the import, I'm then going to update my table here to tell the system what the document number is and if the document has imported into the system. and it's completed, and it will go on to the next document. So what we have here is the ability to create a step-by-step workflow of passing one document from a file store through this process to putting it into your worksite environment. So once we've taken that document information, the next thing we want to do is identify the workspace and folder structure. Again, what we can do is we can set the worksite objects from our source location. We can import everything directly as folders into a workspace. We can ignore certain levels of our file structure if we don't want to include those in our search criteria. We then take the ability to match again on our database that holds the information on our client information. And looking here for the target folders, I'm going to be looking at level 5 from my folder structure here. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I can see here correspondence being that value. So when we come to running this sort of job, I'm actually going to be looking directly at my table to take the data, to take the information from my file store, and I'm going to import that data. Now that's going through about 150 odd documents, maybe 200 documents, and it's going through, hopefully, taking the information it's got and importing it into the correct workspace. So I'll let that run for 20 seconds. So as this is running, if I go to my table now, as I said earlier, we have the ability to update tables. You can see here as it's running, straight away I've started to import data, I've set an update flag to yes, and here's a document number against this document itself, correspondence, in 1079 matter number 6. If I actually take that information now, 1079 matter number 6, and expand, if I expand this workspace and refresh it, you can see we've added new folders into the design that didn't already exist, and there is the information that we've actually now imported into the system. We've now imported multiple parts of data from multiple folder structures into our system, different client matter combinations there in one go. And hopefully you can see the advantages of having a tool like that in terms of setting it up, and you can let this run. You can schedule it to run at certain times to look for new data, or you can have it running as a one-time hit. It's very, very quick and very powerful, and a very flexible tool to have in your back pocket if you ever need to do large-scale migrations. So finally, exporting data. So we've got this workspace here that we just brought some data into, and as I said, the data's come in. The profile card's been written, and the information's there in our history table. It's pretty nice. If I want to get that workspace out of our system, I can right-click again. I can go back to my export documents. Here's my client-side install, and the interface is similar to my import tool. We have a number of options where we can actually physically export it or take out copies. We can force all versions to export, as we can see. We can export the related documents, and we can do differential logging against stuff that's older than a certain time frame, for example. Again, we can filter out. So maybe when I do an export, I only actually want to filter out anything that has been authored by Ben Great. So as a result, I will only filter out, only export anything with that author in this workspace. We could also define that against other values in here. And this, from my experience, is a real key plus for this product, is the ability to filter out what cannot be exported. If we look at the folder names, sometimes we might have some strange folder structure designs. We want to make it look a little bit cleaner, so we can add suffixes to the folder designs as we take them out, or we can take the standard naming convention from our workspace design. When we export stuff, if you exported stuff from Worksite as a standalone, you'll notice that it exports with a strange naming convention, maybe just the document name itself, depending how you set it up. What we can do here is we can export stuff referencing key parts of data in our system. So, for example, what I'm doing here is I've actually added in another component to the naming convention. So when we export the data, it'll export with the name, the number, and the client number itself. And that's pretty nice if you get to give this out to clients who aren't sure what they're looking at, and they can see their client reference in there. We can also set the date ranges back to a sensible date range against the file structure date range, or maybe your server range. And we have the ability to log this as well, like every good product. So when we come to actually export this standalone workspace, you'll see it's going through the structure now. It's looking to export stuff, and it's exported the whole structure here. The folder is exported as 8, and it's actually exported, it's examined 29 documents, but because I don't think B-Great has authored many of those, I'm not sure how much will have been exported. We can actually go to the desktop and actually see how the export looks. Here it is here. I open up the folder structure, there it is, and again, because I filtered out myself or Ben as the filtering option, there was actually no exports of data. So I'm just going to rerun that actually and not put any filtering on with the actual export. So we export again, we go to our options, and under the filtering, I'm going to remove that filter. Okay, so that's picked up a few more documents in there, and I can see now it's actually exported 29 files from within the export itself, and that was pretty quick. So if I now go into the documents, there's our documents there, the document name, number, and then the client code as well. So that's all very well if we got the one workspace, but what I said earlier, we have this export desktop tool, and now if you were to use the Worksite exporter, this comes part of it as well. Okay. So the interface is exactly the same, very, very similar. But what we can do, though, is under the select sources, I can actually select multiple workspaces in one hit. And I can choose the target that I'm going to send these to. I'll send these to group exports. Okay. And again, I've got a number of options. I can save this job as a configuration file, and using our server platform under the job editor here, we can actually run this job and schedule it. So I'm just going to run this job manually. I'll just show you the options are identical with the export options as our desktop tool with the filtering and so forth. When I come to run this now, it's going to run through those workspaces and go through each of the individual 3 workspaces as it comes to them. So whilst I'm doing that, I'll just show you around our export, the options we could do within our job editor. Now this is all part of our server platform where we have a number of different solutions, including the monitoring that we did last week, the refiling server tool allows you to refile content and our Exchange imports. But we also have the generic execute module, and this will allow us to target jobs themselves by using our executable line here where we can target the actual job. But then down here, we've got notifications set up. So we can set up notifications to notify you when the job has, for example, finished okay, or maybe finished with error messages. And then Ben can get an email to tell you whether something has completed or not. And this is pretty popular with users who've got stuff to run overnight. And they want to come in on the morning, see an email that says everything is completed successfully. And then they don't have to worry about maybe the user finding out the hard way that stuff didn't export correctly, or maybe import and that kind of thing. So today we've covered import desktop, import server, and the export tool. And if you have any questions, then please feel free to contact me in the future. Thank you very much for your time, everybody, and have a good day.